Art Briles has been out of football for less than 3 months after the scandal at Baylor led to his departure, but he still has a hard time coming to grips that the season is starting without him on the sidelines. Briles visited Cowboys training camp on Tuesday, watching practice with Jerry Jones, and had the following to say about his status. Briles said, quote, "I'm dumbfounded in trying to process everything as it goes, but it is what it is. Reality is reality, and so what I've got to do is redefine myself and start a new chapter, and that's what I'm doing, because I know who I am. I know what I've been for 60 years. So people may doubt what you say, but they'll always believe what you do. And I've always lived my life in a righteous manner." Jones believes Briles will coach again soon, saying he would serve as a reference for Briles if needed. Briles says he expects to be back in coaching by November or December. Stephen A., any problem with those comments?
Somewhat. I want to preface my comments, Max, by saying I've met Art Briles a couple of times. He seems to be an incredibly nice man. He is not the one who was sentenced to 20 years in jail for sexual assault like one of his players. He is not one of the a bevy of other players he's had through his program that have been arrested and accused of sexual assault. He should not be viewed that way. But what I have a problem with listening to him is that he's not accepting the magnitude of his dereliction of duty as the face of the program. There are parents who swore, or victims who swore they reached out to him and that he ignored their calls. There are others who said that your program ran amok, that you essentially turned a blind eye and a deaf ear, or you dragged your feet. Maybe not literally, but from a perspective standpoint, from the optics, it looked as if there was a level of urgency that you should have attached to the situation that you just didn't seem inclined to do. And so when you come out with statements like, you know who you are, you know what kind of man you are, there's perception and there's the reality of how you conduct yourself. Well, your inaction is part of your conduct. And that's what he's missing in all of this. It's the same thing with Penn State. Joe Paterno, God rest his soul, isn't the sick, psychopathic, sorry, no good Jerry Sandusky who deserves to be under a jail for the rest of his damn life, that was sexually molesting little boys. But you were the overseer of the program. You were the one who threw the president out of your house when he came to fire you. So the president couldn't fire you. You could essentially do what you wanted. If somebody had come to your house and told you Ohio State was cheating, you would have found a way to step up and be more active then. How come you could not have been that way with Jerry Sandusky? This is the same principle for Art Briles. What we're saying, Art Briles, is that couldn't you have done more? Clearly somebody feels yes, because you're no longer the head coach at Baylor. And the biggest part in all of this to me, or just as big, not the biggest, just as big, is Jerry Jones. Whether it's tone deaf, blind, or whatever. You speaking about Art Briles in practically the immediate aftermath of all of this, when you just are a season removed from having brought Greg Hardy on your squad. Jerry Jones, what are you doing? What are you doing? This is the kind of stuff that we're talking about here. I believe anybody can make a mistake. There's certain mistakes that are unforgivable. Child molestation, murder, stuff like that. You know, but anybody, almost anybody can be forgiven the second chances. What I have a problem with Jerry Jones is that time and time again, you make these calls and you seem to be tone deaf to what is going on around you and how it affects the lives of others. And even though this may not have anything to do with it, I'll close by saying this. An incident that has absolutely nothing to do with what we're talking about. I remember when the Rutgers women were insulted by Don Imus.
Yep.
It was wrong. You apologize. Rush Limbaugh, Donovan McNabb. It was wrong. You're supposed to apologize. A bevy of incidents like this. Sometimes it's not the mistake you make, it's how dogged you are in defending yourself instead of just manning up and saying, we erred here. We messed up. I'm sorry, it won't happen again. Let's move forward. It's their refusal to acknowledge the mistakes. That is the problem. And that is the message that I believe Art Briles needs to get.
The tone deafness of Art Briles and Jerry Jones in this instance. I mean, look, if there's a transgression, even one of oversight or willful kind of obstinance about something, willfully ignoring something, you need to show some kind of public contrition. And when you start making excuses and talking about what a great guy you are, that's the opposite of that. But I want to talk about, and you bring up Joe Paterno. You know, the justice, the statue of justice,
Yep.
with blindfolded, with the scales of
Yep.
justice, right? Because justice is blind. It's not that the bad that you do obliterates the good. It's not like the good doesn't count anymore, but it gets weighed in the balance. And in the case of Joe Paterno, unfortunately, at the end of his life, he, through his behavior, through not taking more action, a terrible kind of moral atrocity took place. And I think they have to bring the statues down, the names off, the stuff, like all that stuff, not because he didn't also do a lot of good, but because it gets weighed in the balance. And that bad, I'm sorry, kind of outweighs the good ultimately. It's about relationships. What we're really talking about here is relationships. If Briles has relationships with his players, that will take precedence in his mind over someone he doesn't know as well making some claim. If Jerry Jones has a relationship with Art Briles, that will be more important to him than some kind of abstract notion that Art Briles somehow turned a blind eye to some kind of bad behavior. Relationships are what it's about here. It's one of the reasons the Rooney Rule was so important, because one of the reasons African-American coaches, for example, were locked out is they didn't have relationships in the good old boy network. And I think that's what's happening here. Jerry Jones, there's a part of it that's commendable. He has a relationship here, and he's being true to that over some kind of moral infraction that the guy committed.
But think about this. Art Briles is basically on the record saying, I know I'm going to get another job soon. Think about the audacity of that. I know I'm going to get another. I mean, you know, do I have to go over the list of dudes that have been arrested, sexual assault, sentenced to 20 years in prison for sexually assaulting 2 females, okay? Title IX violations. I mean, what are you talking about? Well, even if you're going to get a job and you got inside knowledge that somehow you're going to land something, why in God's name would you publicly state, I know I'm going to be all right, as if you did nothing wrong? And if you're Jerry Jones and you're fresh off of bringing Greg Hardy on your team, guys getting arrested for all types of stuff, which I went through the other day with the Dallas Cowboys, why would you embrace that with such glee and smugness and what have you? You're just looking at these guys and you're saying, what in God's name are you thinking?
I think in the case of Jerry Jones, and this is like, it's two-sided in this sense. You're right. It's a very bad look. But there is also a part of you that acknowledges, boy, if you have a friend in Jerry Jones, that dude is loyal. He's going to stand by you. And that's what I mean by relationships. Maybe Briles feels, because he has networked enough, because he's embraced by a football community, that he is inoculated somehow from the kind of problems that were obviously apparent in his
I get what you're saying. Hold on, Molly. I get what you're saying. But the last point I want to make is there's a difference between saying, look, bad things happen. He's my friend. I love him. I understand him. He made a mistake. I want him to get another chance. There's a difference between doing that and coming across as if you're a victim who's done nothing wrong.
Oh, Art Briles.
Or you're the friend of a victim who's done nothing wrong in the face of all this evidence. Art Briles may be a very good man. I am not here to cast aspersions on him. But there is clear that there was a negligence of duty on his part. At least, how difficult is that to own up to, Molly? How difficult is that to own up to, Max? Where you just stand back and say, you know what? I should have been more on top of
In that
this.
sense, Jerry Jones and those like him, although he's now done it publicly, are not good for Art Briles because they create this kind of enabling sense, and maybe that contributes to his tone deafness about all this, because, Molly, it certainly doesn't seem like he's very contrite.
That's the thing, and especially when you're talking to reporters, can't he come out and be remorseful? And he has the opportunity to correct himself, to apologize, to say how he mishandled things, and then get into, I'm hopeful that I'll have a second chance and be a little more humble in it. And then the other thing is, if you're Jerry Jones, can't you say, if that's your boy, can't you be like, listen, I understand you made a mistake, da-da-da, and hang out outside of camp where there's a million reporters there? And just act like it's perfectly okay when his program's a mess? That's what I don't get. Why are you doing that publicly in people's faces? And again, I think that's when it becomes like egotistical and you're just above everything.
Right.
You're above it. You're above the law, and it's all good. That's my boy. But not being aware of how his team's being perceived or caring.
And that's the way Jerry Jones, as Stephen A. articulately laid out, has branded the Cowboys, essentially. That they believe they're above societal standards. And it's a bad look for them, particularly, I mean, I hate to couple it to this, when they ain't winning. Yep. It's not as though you're doing that and and you have a certain process and you're winning. And in addition to that, you've been losing.
Here's the bottom line. I think the Dallas Cowboys stink, but I'm usually playing around when I say that because we're just talking about games. This is serious, and it just disappoints me how how lax Jerry Jones appears sometimes. There's no reason for that. He's better than that.
And by the way, it was a law firm brought in to look at, like, I mean, it was independent. It wasn't like, I mean, this was what they found, and as a result of what they found, Briles was dismissed.
And one last thing, in those quotes, and I know they're just quotes, Briles came across a little bit like the victim himself. Like he was dumbfounded how everything happened rather than owning it, which was interesting too.